When something's as powerful and influential as a book, of course there are people who are afraid of it and want to keep people from reading it. But what exactly are the most common, specific reasons for banning books? And what exactly does book banning look like? That's what we're going to learn about in today's video, Issue of Literary Censorship. Social issues and other aspects of history, society, and politics are what my content here at the World Present and Past tends to be about. If you're impressed by this video, check out some more of my content afterwards, particularly the links on your end screen and videos of mine in your suggestions feed. If you think it's worth signing up to get more, you know which 2 buttons to press. Let's start by talking about the history of literary censorship. Governments and other institutions have been restricting what kinds of media can and cannot be released to the public ever since the beginning of time. Literary censorship is nowhere near a new phenomenon, but it's an issue that's become quite prevalent in recent years. But where does it all come from and how did it get to the point it's at now? I'll preface this by saying that while most societies restrict what literature can and cannot be published, what differs from one to the other is the degree, nature, and extent of such restrictions. Throughout history, societies practiced various forms of censorship in the belief that the community, as represented by the government, was responsible for molding the individual. According to Harvard Library, the first book to be formally banned was Thomas Morton's 1637 book, New English Canaan. Church leaders who prohibit members of their faith from reading banned books may want to shelter them from perceived obscene, immoral, or profane ideas or situations, or from ideas that may challenge the doctrine of that religion. On the flip side of that, certain religious writings have also been banned from the public eye. In countries where Christianity isn't or wasn't the norm, the Bible has been banned and copies of the Bible even burned. The Russian Empire banned Leo Tolstoy's religious-based book, The Kingdom of God is Within You, for being anti-establishment. Despite the different reasons, motives, degrees, and enforcements of book bannings, they all have one thing in common. When a book is banned, that just makes people want to read it even more, and the book is popularized even further. So if you want people to read a book, ban it. I almost want to suggest to anyone trying to write a book that they write the kind of book they know will likely be banned. Let's talk about book burning. This is probably the first thing that comes to mind when one hears the term book banning, especially since it's commonplace in the society in which Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 takes place. But it's far from being what book banning always is. What's really scary about book burning is that it's usually done publicly and ceremonially. Like the destruction of literature some consider offensive is something to be celebrated and cheered for. A historically notable example of book burnings took place in Nazi Germany when books by Jewish authors and any other book considered un-German was publicly burned. The worst part, however, is that the U.S. Constitution lists book burnings as something that's protected by freedom of expression. So what else might book banning look like? In the United States, school organizations that find contents of a book to be offensive or unfit for a given age group will often have the book removed from the class curriculum. This type of censorship is usually initiated by parents. Parents who do not feel comfortable with a child's required reading will make efforts to have the book removed from a class and replaced by another title. Shelf removal is exactly what it sounds like, making a book unavailable to be bought at a bookstore or checked out from a library. Privishing is the practice by which a book publisher, at the behest of governments or special interests, acquires the rights to a manuscript and then sabotages the distribution and marketing of the book, usually breaching publishing contracts. Means by which this is done include cutting print runs so as to make books unprofitable, scaling back promotional efforts, delaying release so as to miss holiday seasons, cutting advertising budgets, and pressuring reviewers to be hostile. This is scary because it's a particularly sneaky way to censor books. So why exactly would anyone want to ban a book? A very common reason books are banned is simply because they contain profanity, swearing, and other offensive language. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain is a book that has been censored and considered controversial for over 100 years. It's been argued whether the book should be considered racist or anti-racist due to the use of the N-word in the text. The F-bomb is also a good word to get a book banned or challenged, particularly if it's used multiple times in the text. Probably the number one reason books are being banned these days is that parents claim the books are age inappropriate. Topics of violence, sexual activities, and inappropriate language are the largest contributors to what determines age appropriateness. Due to this, children's and YA novels tend to be the largest target in the field of banned books. Many parents and concerned parties will challenge titles or hold back books from children in hopes that they will not negatively impact an impressionable child or teen. Common examples of this include Looking for Alaska, I Am Jazz, and Habibi, which were all listed on the American Library Association's Top 10 Challenged Books for 2015 for age appropriateness. However, free speech organizations and library groups note that in practice, the books that are challenged on a basis of being inappropriate or containing sexual content lean heavily towards those dealing with LGBT and racially diverse characters. Of all the things that could possibly make a book age inappropriate, it seems like sexual content of any kind is what gets books censored to children and youth the fastest. Concerned parties worry that reading books about sex will cause the reader to think about, express interest, or have sex. In 2013, the American Library Association ranked 50 Shades of Grey as number 4 on the annual study of challenged books for its graphic sexual content. In addition, The Country Girls by Edna O'Brien was banned by Ireland's censorship board in 1960 for the book's explicit sexual content. Motivations behind book bannings are often religious. This can be either because a book is religiously charged or because it criticizes or opposes religion, or even just because it expresses ideas that go against the censoring party's religion. On one hand, the Bible itself has been censored. On the other hand, Christians have burned pagan books, burned down Muslim libraries during the Crusades, and Spanish colonizers have burned Mayan historical documents. As a particular type of religious motivation, many fantasy books in particular are banned because they contain and seem to promote witchcraft, sorcery, and the occult. Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling was the number 1 most challenged book series in 2001 and 2002 for the use of witchcraft and for being satanic, according to the American Library Association. In recent years in particular, we're seeing a lot of censorship of books that touch on racism and racial issues, or even just center around characters of color. On the opposite end, there's a lot of censorship of books that supposedly encourage racism towards a particular group of people. Perhaps an example of one that's been challenged on both ends is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. On one hand, the novel humanizes a race that, at the time of its release, was classed as property and forced into lives of slave labor. On the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, it uses the N-word several times. Another book that's been censored because of racial issues is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. LGBTQ plus characters and themes are another huge reason books are banned these days. This is often justified by claiming that these books are inherently sexual or will make readers homosexual, but neither one of these things is true about LGBTQ books. You can depict an LGBTQ relationship without it being inherently sexual, just like you can do with an opposite-sex relationship. And sexual orientation is genetically predisposed, and no book is going to change that. So what does literary censorship look like around the world? One of the most prominent historical examples of book banning took place in Nazi Germany during the Second World War. Nazis would seize properties at random and look for any books by Jewish authors or which contained ideas they considered un-German. These books were then burned in a highly public fire. The materials included in the burning were not limited to works made within the Weimar Republic of the time, and the blacklist being followed reached to American authors as well as socialist and communist works. Ultimately, the blacklist for book burnings was focused on any content that would threaten the totality of Nazi power in Germany. More than anything else, these book burnings were aiming to remove Jewish cultural influences in Germany at the order of the rising Nazi regime. Ireland's relationship with censorship was connected to the passing of the Censorship of Publications Act in 1929 as a result of an all-encompassing effort on the part of the Catholic Actions groups. For the 38 years before the act was repealed, the status of Irish works was left completely at the whim of members of the Catholic Church. In accordance with the act, the censorship board would be composed of a member of the Catholic Truth Society of Ireland or a Knight of St. Columbanus, as well as 3 additional Catholics and a final Protestant. This congregation was tasked with deciding whether or not a work had any tendency towards the indecent or obscene. There was a lot of literary censorship during the apartheid regime in South Africa. This literary censorship was geared towards silencing anyone who sought to criticize the South African government, particularly for its policies of racial segregation. The censorship of such writings was legalized under the institution of the 1950 Suppression of Communism Act. This act was the government's tool to refute any anti-government propaganda being released against the apartheid, allowing the works of any person who had left the country or who was considered to have acted against the state to be prohibited entirely. It took until the 1990s for the South African government to actually read the materials they wanted to ban to see if they actually were, in fact, worth banning. This evaluation led to much of the considerations for prohibited materials to become limited to explicit topics instead of politically driven messaging. Though some materials remained undesirable following this reevaluation, there were major publications that were then allowed to be distributed in South Africa. Especially notable was the country's growing openness to various works of political thinkers such as Nelson Mandela, Karl Marx, and Vladimir Lenin. Credit for this new perspective can be offered towards an increasingly liberal political climate coming into place in the early 1990s. Hearing all this stuff about literary censorship probably sounds really scary, but the good news is that there are things you as a civilian can do about it. The Great Books Foundation, along with many other educational organizations, believes in the power of knowledge and that students should be exploring a range of ideas and thinking critically. In order to create students who are thinkers and can engage in respectful, civil discourse, we need challenging and diverse texts to serve as objects of inquiry. The National Education Association reports that educators and librarians who have long been trained, tasked, and trusted to curate texts for students are pushing back against those who want to censor literature. They argue that students should have access to resources that help them better understand the lives, cultures, and experiences of different people. So what can the Great Books Foundation and other educational organizations do to fight literary censorship? And what can you as an individual do to help? One of the first and foremost things you can do is read the books that are on the frequently banned and challenged list and encourage your friends and family to read them too. Moreover, start conversations about how the current censorship movement is being propelled by only a few specific extreme advocacy groups. It's also important to search out information and to join the public discourse so the arguments from educators, readers, and the public against censorship are as vocal and headline-grabbing as those from the book banners themselves. If you want to do something on a larger scale, join groups like the Great Books Foundation that are actively combating literary censorship. The state of Illinois actually passed a ban on book bans in its public schools and libraries. Vote and publicly advocate for policies like these around where you live. The world's largest publisher, Penguin Random House, has also entered the fray, filing a lawsuit against a book banning school district in Florida. Another great way you can help combat literary censorship is by participating in the American Library Association's Banned Books Week. If your local school or library is hosting any events or gatherings for Banned Books Week, attend them to show that you won't stand for the unjust banning of books. Yet another thing you can do to combat book censorship is promote and use the shared inquiry method of learning. Central to this process is the sharing of engaging texts, positing ideas, debating issues, and thinking critically. This method helps students take part in respectful, collaborative discussions that prepare them to be informed citizens who can actively participate in a democratic society. At the ALA's 2023 conference in Chicago, author and activist Ibram X. Kendi gave a moving keynote speech at the Rally for the Right to Read, Uniting for Libraries and Intellectual Freedom. In his speech, Kendi praised librarians as modern-day freedom fighters. As Kendi put it, the freedom fight has chosen every single person who treasures books, who treasures knowledge, who treasures the truth. The freedom fight has chosen every single American who recognizes that an institution without books about racism, without books about homophobia, without books about the Holocaust, without queer characters, without books by authors of color, is not a library. It is a propaganda shop masquerading as a library. What was the most shocking thing you learned about literary censorship today? Does my video have you caring even more about this issue and wanting to fight to stop it? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video and it has you wanting even more content like it on history, sociology, and social justice issues, all you have to do is click the subscribe button and notification bell. While you wait for my next video, check out a video YouTube thinks you specifically would enjoy, or my most recent video besides this one, or both if you really want. Hope to see you back here next time.